Okay. Hello, my beautiful people. Welcome to the next in the Walk Through the Zodiac series with Heather from Astrology with Heather over on YouTube. Heather, it's amazing to have you again. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this project. It's been awesome so far. I've learned a ton about about astrology. If you haven't gone over to Heather's channel, please go over to it now and hit that subscribe button. We're going to be walking through the entire Zodiac of the Major Arcana and all of their associations. You guys already know me. Heather, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun, and I've been learning so many new things about tarot and even astrology. It helps to, get a different sort of perspective on things to learn about the associations with the tarot. So this has been awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so today we are here to talk about the Emperor. So this is another, I mean, they're all interesting cards because they're so symbolic, right? They have so many different meanings and layers, just like the astrology. I think that's one of the reasons that they kind of fit together so well, and where you can see kind of like the overlap. So the Emperor is probably, it's not the only card, but he's one of the only cards that only has one association. So whenever you see the Emperor, his astrological association is Aries. And you can see that in the card. So if you see the rams that are on his throne there, so he's got two shoulders and then down by here. And that's kind of a nod to his kind of station, but also his astrological association. You can see there the red background, and then obviously the red of his clothing and his tunic. So those are all things that correspond to the Aries ruler, which is
what? Sorry.
Oh, the ruling planet of Aries.
Oh, sorry. Mars, of course.
So yeah, and obviously, so we talked last week, a couple of weeks ago now, about the Empress is where you finally meet the material world, right? She was like the motherly sort of nurturing, very sensual sort of aspect of life. So if she were the mother, the Emperor would be the father. This is where you start to meet that sort of masculine energy. And I always see this is quite interesting, like the way that it kind of parallels life. So when you're little, if your mum wanted to scare you, right, she'd say to you, well, I'm going to tell your dad if you keep doing that. And straight away, you kind of like, okay, I better back up my ideas. And this is kind of that idea. This is where you meet the structure. It's where you meet when I say the structure, it's more like the rules. This is where you meet the regulations and the kind of the line in the sand, so to speak. And with your Emperor, he very much has that association of learning, as we'll see when we get into the sort of the depths of it. And whenever you see the father in any sort of aspect, you kind of see him as more like the disciplinarian. So I want to ask you about that. When you think of Aries, is that where we get the idea of law from? Or
not necessarily. Law is associated, and a lot of these things that you're saying are associated actually with Capricorn and with Saturn. And so when I was reading through your description of the Emperor, even though there's that strong association with Aries, I was also picking up on that Saturnian energy. It's almost like a Mars-Aries combination, where it's very direct, very action-oriented, very martial, but also there is that structure and that almost like consistency or that determination, where Mars has determination to start things, but without that Saturnian energy to ground it, Aries isn't necessarily the best energy to follow through with things. They're so determined to get things started. They're so determined to get their way, to do what they want to do, when they want to do it, and how they want to do it. But it's not necessarily the best for follow through. You have to have supporting planetary energy for that as well, or else you're going to get someone who's starting a bunch of things and just leaving everything unfinished. So there is that Saturnian quality, I would say, from your description of the Emperor.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because Mars does really well in Capricorn, right?
Yes. Mars is exalted. It does really well in Capricorn. That's one of the best placements. And it's because of that energy of determination, of being able to start something, but to understand that, things take time and that you have to have that determination and continually sort of revive that energy of like motivation and action that that's associated with Mars. So Mars in Capricorn people, they understand the value of delayed gratification. They understand that there are sometimes rules and regulations and restrictions, and that there's a method to completing tasks and accomplishing their goals. So it's more about the methodology as opposed to just initiating, because in this moment, I want this thing, right? That's Aries. In this moment, I want this thing. I'm going to do it. I don't care who says what or who's going to stand in my way. I'm going to make it happen. There's a little bit of a different vibe when you add some Saturn there.
Yeah, I love that. It makes total sense as well, because the Aries energy being that sort of, go, go, go. And then when you meet like the dad, he kind of says to you, slow down, stop doing that. He kind of puts a little bit of a slower energy into what you're doing. So you're gaining that sort of knowledge of how to act in the world, how it is that you actually show up, how it is that you can behave, and it's funny you said martial as well. That's very much an energy that you will find here with the Emperor. If you can see there, so the throne that he sat on is made of stone, and a big part of that is his it's the position of the station for sure, but it's all about ruling or coming into contact with the material world, where you meet the rules and the regulations that you kind of have to play by. These are the things that you would the things that are considered almost like in society, you have to behave a certain way in order to be deemed kind of acceptable and stuff. And the other thing is with that stone, with the stone, what it kind of represents is this idea of institutions. So when you see the Emperor, he very much represents, so this could be places of learning, so it would be schools, universities. The Emperor also rules hospitals as well, and you'll see this card come up for people that work as surgeons, people that work with any, I've actually seen this coupled with the Empress represent somebody that worked as a plastic surgeon.
Okay,
that makes sense. A really
Mars rules surgeons, so yeah. And that stone energy, by the way, I mean, I'm sure you're aware of this, but Saturn rules like stone, rocks, things like that. So there's still that Saturnian vibe, right?
Absolutely. And I find that really interesting because, Mars being happy over in the sign of Capricorn and stuff and being exalted there, you get to see, and very much as well. So your Emperor is, obviously it has that Aries kind of rule. It would be somebody that starts as a soldier, but goes on to then discover their wisdom, and they move from being a soldier into being a general. This is where somebody finds that, the ability to transcend just following orders and doing as you're told, and using that knowledge almost strategically.
Okay, so it's kind of like mastery over the will, which would be
very absolutely
Aries, Mars energy.
For sure. So, and this is the other thing as well. When you see the Emperor, it is a lot of willpower. It's not so much like when people see this card, certainly in the beginning, a lot of people will say, like, oh, okay, so this is just your rule or your authority or your willpower. We saw the pure will when we approached the Magician. Because that's where you can kind of see the undiluted force. The Emperor is what would give it some sort of direction. It would give it that sort of focus rather than it just being a power or something that was unconscious. And if you notice as well, if you remember the Magician, he wears that red cloak, right? So there's kind of a nod to that energy to say, right, okay, so this is the will when it's directed or when it's given some sort of focus or task.
Okay. And he's got that armor underneath his red cloak too. So it's kind of like that warrior energy and almost like a defense energy, right? So would you say that the Emperor would represent someone or a situation where you need to be like really defensive or, on the prepared?
Absolutely. Both of those. So the fact that he's got the armor on underneath the red tunic is to say that, right, so I've got all of these attributes, I'm able to do all of these things, but underneath I have the strength and also the wisdom to act, to attack or to defend as the need might arise. So when the Emperor is all about attack, this is about using your strategy and also your willpower. It's about combining those two forces to get sort of bleep done. And then you just stop being such a potty mouth. But yeah, this is where you kind of put foot to butt. And then on the other side of it, yeah, it's exactly that. This idea of being in the defensive position, but from a strong position. So
Okay.
he's able to kind of, say, right, I will attack if I need to, but I'm also okay to defend. I'm also okay to draw that sort of line in the sand, so to speak.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
The other thing is as well, because he is an emperor, he's a ruler, right? So he's in charge. And there is
Mhm.
this idea behind it as well, where you talk about knowing when to act, knowing when to kind of step forward with something or put something forward, which kind of leads me up to as well, if you see his crown,
Mhm.
that represents the wisdom that you find in the paternal lineage. That represents the power that there is in the masculine energy. So with the Empress, we saw her as very nurturing, very motherly, almost like intuitive, but on a very sensual level. Where we
Mhm.
see the Emperor, who is kind of like, right, okay, this is how you need to think. This is the way that you become a strategist. It's very much about imparting knowledge, which is where you get the meaning behind it of the institutions. So you'll see it represent things like schools, universities, and whatnot. And also, the crown is a nod to the fact that Aries is the leader of the zodiac.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And also, Aries rules the head, so
Oh,
you
I
got
have a
that going on too.
question. Is it true that, so, because I remember somebody saying that your ascendant kind of typifies your features. So,
It does. Usually, you look like a combination of your ascendant and your sun sign. So you'll get a combination of both when it comes to your physical appearance, but especially the ascendant. And especially if you have planets in the first house, those planets will show up in your features. So somebody with like a lot of Aries would have usually larger eyes, kind of like maybe a bigger forehead. They have that sort of Aries look where they almost look like a ram. And they're usually more stout and like muscular, that type of thing, versus somebody who maybe has a Venusian energy. So maybe there's Venus. And so they have more delicate, like pretty features. Even if it's a man, they have more like sort of feminine, delicate, pretty sort of features to their face. So those two things are, yeah, so definitely the first house and that ascendant energy has a strong association with the way that somebody looks, but you also have to look at that sun energy, which is why it's hard to guess people's sun signs, because usually you're showing up as a combination of your sun and your rising sign, especially when you're first kind of interacting with someone. So you might guess their rising sign as their sun sign, but maybe they don't know their rising sign, right? So usually I can get one or the other, but they have to know what their rising sign is.
that's really cool. Yeah, because I remember someone saying that if somebody has an Aries ascendant, they'll have like really pronounced eyebrows or like
Yes.
really
Their
high
eyebrows and their
arches.
eyes are usually larger, and their forehead's it's more like a pointy shape almost, like their forehead's more prominent.
That's so cool. That's really like just the way that you can like literally see somebody like embody their sign or a sign that they have a strong association with. I've noticed that people who have Uranus in the first house tend to have like a really ethereal look about them. That's just
Okay, yeah.
everybody that I've known that's got a Uranus in the first house. They've either got like really piercing or strange sort of magnetic eyes, or they're really sort of just really different looking.
Yeah, I mean, and their style would be really different too. Like they have just
Yes,
a very unique, unusual style.
absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, I've some questions for you as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The characteristics of Aries, like how is there any overlap in the stuff that we've talked about, or is it kind of very, very different?
There is definitely some overlap. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's the first sign in the zodiac, and it's pretty much the most simplistic and the most straightforward when it comes to the way that the energy is played out. Like it's very action oriented, very optimistic, very enthusiastic. Usually people who have Aries, ascendants or sun signs, they're very energetic. They can be like a tornado. Like I had a friend who was an Aries rising. Oh my goodness. When she would come to our house, it literally felt like a tornado just came through. Like just
Yeah.
the energy was palpable, like so much energy. I've never felt so much energy from any one person. And she was a Gemini sun too, so there was just a lot going on there. But you can feel it; it's palpable. Like they're very direct. They want what they want when they want it, and they do what they want to do when they want to do it. They're very independent, very strong-willed, and it's very hard to stop an Aries once they decide that they want to do something. So they're gonna make that thing happen, even if they maybe don't follow through with it because they don't have that support in their chart for it. They're going to make the thing happen at the very least.
Yeah.
And it is kind of self-centered. It's a self-centered energy where they're focused on what they want, their own personal development, their needs, their self-interest over the needs and interests of other people. And so they do get this reputation for being selfish. And it's not because they don't care about other people. It's because their focus in this lifetime is on their self-development, exercising their will out in the world. And so anything that gets in the way of that, which other people will always do that, even in the best relationships, that's going to be a little bit difficult for an Aries person. So they need someone who's going to step out of their way and just let them, push through and manifest what they're trying to manifest. And that martial energy too, with Aries, they can be very combative. They can be more defensive. That is part of that energy. They're known for having a bit of a temper. And Aries is very much associated with war. I mean, Aries is the god of war, right? Mars is also the god of war. Aries is associated with arguments and disputes and fights. And it's not because they don't care about people or they're trying to get into fights. It's because they want their way. Yeah. Someone with a strong Aries is going to get their way. And a lot of those things that you talked about, like people who are in positions of power and authority, a lot of times there's a strong fire energy. Aries can be a part of that because Aries needs to do what it wants to do and it can't be sort of subject to other people's limitations and restrictions. They need to make their own rules. And so they do much better in independent types of fields or in positions of power, like in a management position, because they get to tell other people what they want and then those people have to do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They don't get told, they do the telling.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you said about authority as well. This is very often, I will see this for people that work in some sort of uniform. So your military, people that have been in the army, people that are doctors. I very often see this card come up for people whose title is their job. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Like, so doctor or lawyer or
they'd make good lawyers. They would argue things to death.
It's so funny.
If you want like a shark for a lawyer, like you find yourself a strong Aries for sure. Scorpio too. Scorpio will get in there and like they'll find the thing that like the other person wasn't necessarily expecting, and they will hit them where it hurts. So those two Mars ruled signs are really good for law in this day and age. Not necessarily fair and balanced law, like dirty law, like we're going to get what we want.
For sure. I love it. It's funny. You hit so many things on that. My mum is an Aries. And a lot of the stuff that you said just totally describes her. Very forceful, can sometimes be really argumentative. And it's just interesting to see the way that comes across. Also, that idea of being forceful and passionate and stuff, again, because it's a very masculine energy. This is a very masculine card. It has a lot of that sort of energy behind it. And so you do see that sort of very independent, but also very forceful, sometimes bordering on, if you didn't know them, sometimes it might come across as almost like narcissistic because it's like you don't really think about anything or anyone but yourself. I find as well with Aries, they kind of like to joust. So sometimes it's more about fun rather than sort of, an actual argument. Do you see that a lot?
Yeah. Absolutely, especially in like children who have a lot of Aries, like they'll literally play fight. Like they'll be like, sword fighting and things like that, like doing all those very Aries things. But it's fun for them. They like to get a rise out of people because arguments are fun. They like to win.
Absolutely. Awesome. So why is Aries the start of the Zodiac, or why does it have that association?
So Aries is the first sign of the zodiac for a variety of reasons. So people don't like when I talk about this because a lot of people are in Australia and things like that. But the modern Western zodiac, the tropical zodiac, originated here in the Northern Hemisphere. And so we have Aries as a cardinal fire sign, and it's associated with the spring equinox, which is the beginning of, the astrological year. Essentially, it's when things are being born, right? We have baby birds being born. We have animals and bunnies and things like that, reproducing. We have plants, finally starting to bud and bloom and that type of thing. So this is the time of rebirth. This is the time where things are initiated and you start to see some physical manifestation on sort of a nature level, right? On the level of what happens in the natural realm. And so that's a big part of that association with Aries. And it's when things get warmer, right? When things start to heat up a little bit, that fire energy after having a really cold, long winter. In the Southern Hemisphere, it's going to be the time of fall. So that's going to be a little bit different, but it didn't originate there. So that's, I'm sorry, I didn't do that. This happened thousands of years ago.
As well, right? It works when you think about it just on a symbolic level rather than your hemisphere. You can still kind of understand that mode of thinking. Absolutely, it makes sense.
Absolutely. And so that's part of the reason there. And it's also just cardinal fire, right? Cardinal energy is about initiating. It's the start of each new season. Fire energy is about action. And so this is like a very direct energy. It's like, I'm going to start something now because I want to start it. And so it's the start of the zodiac, right? These are the two most initiatory types of energy that you can have in the zodiac, and they're combined in Aries. And so it would make sense that this would be the first sign of the zodiac as well.
Awesome. Leads me to another question. Sorry, I don't have too many more, I promise. So what can an Aries person do to maybe tap into that energy of completing things? Like, is there anything that you could say to them, like, maybe you could try this, or is there anything that you would suggest?
I mean, you have to play to your strengths. And so if you have like a strong Saturn energy somewhere in your chart, everyone has Saturn somewhere, but it's not always strong, right? Maybe Saturn's with Neptune and it's kind of like a weak follow through. But if you have a strong Saturnian energy, look at that energy in your chart and play to those strengths. Maybe you're very good at following through with ideas and things like that. So maybe it's Saturn in the third house, which would be more mental, right? And more communicative. So if you can follow through with things that involve communication, if you can follow through with things like with your ideas and that type of thing. So you can kind of look to where Saturn is to find that grounded energy and that energy of something that can be created for the long term. You're going to have to put work into that, but that's definitely part of it. But if that's not one of your strengths, that's completely okay. Maybe you're an initiator and you need to have people who do the follow through. And that's a big thing with a lot of Aries people. And that's why they do well in those management positions. I'm going to initiate this thing. This is a great idea. I'm so pumped about it. I'm going to get it going. And then I'm going to delegate because they're really good at delegating and telling people what to do, right? So find people who can follow through with things in your day-to-day life. Surround yourself with those people that want to support you, that want to carry out those tasks. Find a Virgo, right? Virgos are really good at being a support system and doing things on a practical level behind the scenes. Get some Virgos in your life. Get that going. But you can't, there's no way to like change who you are, right? I don't recommend that people try to be someone that they're not, because you're not going to be happy and you're probably not going to be super successful at it. You want to be you and do it in the best possible way so that way you can navigate this reality. And this reality does usually require some sort of follow through. Otherwise, you just have a bunch of half-finished projects all over the place and you're not going to get very far. So usually you need, and that's the thing too with Aries, they want to do things themselves because they're Aries, right? Very strong-willed, very focused on me. I want this. You have to look to others as a means of support. You can't always do everything yourself. And that's kind of that energy of integrating the opposition, which would be Libra. And so finding that balance between your needs and finding that support system, and also, helping them to carry out and follow through with their needs at the same time. Like maybe they need someone who can initiate and maybe they want to be that support system. So not necessarily forcing people to do things for you, but finding a way where it's mutually receptive and there's a good balance there. But I would say play to your strengths. Maybe you have that in your chart, maybe you don't. If you don't, then find someone who does.
Yeah, I love that. It's brilliant. And it actually feeds into this idea of military, of places
Mm,
like universities or schools or even hospitals, all of that stuff. Because ultimately, your job, the thing that you do, is all about you, but you have a support system, you have something bigger that you're sort of tied to or attached to that allows you to sort of still remain autonomous, but within, like you said, a support group or a support system.
yeah.
And that's a really, really interesting thing that you brought up there. And I think it actually, that's great. It kind of makes a lot more sense now because I'm looking at people that, I mean, I know I couldn't do it. It's just my mind doesn't work that way. I have ODD, obsessive defiance disorder. So I couldn't be told, but it really makes a lot of sense. So like if you have that energy where you are forceful and driven and fiercely independent, but you then have this thing to rely on, it makes total sense. And obviously, like you said, Aries is the opposite in the zodiac is Libra, which is where you find that partnership and the balance or the mirror to yourself in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I never really thought about like Aries being associated with like schools and hospitals and things like that, but it does make sense because there's a hierarchy and they would get that support system they need. Like not every Aries person is going to be in the military. Not every Aries person is going to be a police officer or a surgeon
Yeah.
or something, or a business owner, right? Like they might be something else, and it could be utilized in a lot of different occupations. So long as you have those supporting aspects, those supporting players that can help you to build what you're trying to create. And help you with the follow through. So yeah, I like that association. I've never thought about that, but now I'm going to recommend some of my Aries people think about things like that because it makes perfect sense.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, that actually brings me on to my last point. The Aries isn't the Aries. The Emperor is number 4, and 4 is the material world, right? It's the structure. It's the, like you said, like even the hierarchy of things. I love what you said about the way that it represents spring as well. I can totally see that in Aries. It's like that unstoppable energy, and when you think of spring, it is kind of that unstoppable growth energy. Everything just wants to bloom, to become, to kind of, the flowers start blooming, to finally see the light of day, and seeds are starting to crack open. So yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, the last thing that I wanted to ask you actually is what kind of things, so what are like the buzzwords that Aries rules that everybody would kind of know about, or what are the usual things that you would associate?
So action, willpower, competition,
I love that.
initiation, of course, arguments, dispute, war, power. That's a big thing with Aries, but more physical power, whereas Scorpio, which is the other Mars ruled sign, is more about psychological power and psychic power. Mars is about physical power and physical strength. And so you'll see a lot of Aries people who are very into athletic competition because that would be a very Aries thing. They might just be athletic because they want to prove their strength, or they want to use their muscles, or they need to sort of get that energy out. But that it's very energized. It's energy, like pure physical energy. That's Aries. I would also say optimism, ambition, motivation. Those are all really good Aries traits and Aries keywords. So it's not all just like fighting and self involved and all of that. They're very highly motivated, highly ambitious. If they want to make something happen, they're going to make it happen. So I would say determination would be part of it too. In a certain context, right? You have to kind of look at it like, I'm determined to make this happen, not necessarily determination for the long term. And it can be an impulsive energy too, for sure. Like Aries is impulsivity. It's like, I feel this visceral like energy. I feel like I need to do this right now and I'm going to do it. And if you're an Aries, that's usually right. Like that's usually how you know when you need to initiate something. It's like an impulse that you cannot possibly resist because it's so visceral and it like overpowers you. And that passion too. I mean, Aries is passion. Mars rules things like sexuality and the physical expression of sexuality, and Mars can be that energy, or Aries can have that energy too. And so definitely a physical expression of love can be associated with Aries. They can be very passionate in that regard. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a good amount of
Yeah, that's
keywords, right?
brilliant. Thank you. More actually, there's so many more, which is fantastic. Well, Heather, as ever, you've completely blown my mind and given me a ton of stuff to think about. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
Um,
thank
Thank you
you.
for being here. So again, people can find you at your channel, which is
Astrology with Heather.
awesome. And yeah, well, I'm going to stick the link in the description box below so that you can jump over to Heather's channel where she's got a bunch of other amazing content on all kinds of things at the moment and everything astrological. And the next talk is going to be on your channel.
Yes, it will be on my channel. So we'll see you next Thursday on my channel. So pop on over there. And thank you so much, Raphael. This has been awesome. I love doing these videos and I'm learning a lot too. It's definitely gives me like another perspective or another layer to think about when I'm thinking about the Zodiac. So this has been fun.
Thank you. Awesome.